I'm going to cover 5 common mistakes new NestJS developers make, and also at the end of the video, I'm going to cover a bonus mistake that even more experienced NestJS developers make, so stick around for that. Let's start with the classic one. So you copy paste some code from another module, you run npm run start dev, and you get an error in your terminal. And that's mistake number 1, forgetting to import external module dependencies. And in that case, turns out the import of the database module is missing. It's an easy mistake to make, and it's not just about external dependencies. Sometimes some modules also need to be registered in the root module as well. And if you create internal services manually, don't forget to register them in the module. And if that service is meant to be used outside the module, don't forget to put it in the exports list. But there is a way to prevent some of these mistakes. Use the NestJS CLI. So the CLI won't forget to register things, but you might. At least your internal services are registered automatically, and if you generate a module using the CLI, it will automatically be imported in the root module. But the CLI can't guess the external dependencies, so you need to do it manually. But of course, this only works if you understand how modules, providers, and controllers fit together. Because if you don't, here is how you might try to fix an error you don't understand. You're new to NestJS, things aren't working, so you give up on the constructor and you just create an instance manually. It runs, it works, but your tech lead rejects your pull request. This is mistake number 2, not using dependency injection. The current implementation works because our database service is just an in-memory database, but what happens when it evolves? Let's say that the database service now connects to a Mongo database and uses some config options. This manual instantiation breaks everything. And even if you wanted to provide the dependencies manually, how would you do it? You're stuck. The best thing to do is just to let NestJS take care of creating the services instances and inject them. But of course, you need to understand how dependency injection works in NestJS. Because if you don't, here is how you might get carried away. Let's say you need to validate emails. You decide to be clever and you create a whole module and service just for that. And that's mistake number 3, overusing dependency injection. If your logic is small, self-contained, and it doesn't need config or external state, just write a utility function. So move it to a utils folder and import it directly. Clean, simple, done. But beyond the overkill use of the dependency injection, did you spot the other mistake? Because understanding dependency injection is one thing, but understanding architecture is another. Because even with the best intentions, you might write code in the wrong place. For example, checking if the email is already taken is not a controller concern. And that's mistake number 4, breaking the default NestJS architecture by putting business logic in the controller layer. Keep controllers focused on handling requests and dealing with the responses. So move the business rules in the service layer where they belong. And once you move the logic, you might think you're done. But that assumes you actually understand the request lifecycle. Because if you don't, here is what you might miss. You copy paste code from your to-dos controller into your users controller. But you forgot the useGuard decorator. And now all your users endpoint are public. Whoops! That's mistake number 5, forgetting to put the request lifecycle decorators. Because a good understanding of guards, interceptors, pipes, middlewares, and exception filters are what you need. Because they are all part of the request lifecycle and they all play a specific role in the outcome of the request. Okay, now you add the missing guards and you run your end-to-end test. Everything green, they all pass, so you are ready to ship, right? But let me ask you something first. Would you leave the oven on when you leave your house? Nothing might happen, but something dramatic might happen. The same goes for your application. There are things that need to be done when your application shuts down. Because if you don't, here is what you might miss. Did you notice the warning message in the terminal? So it's very tempting to ignore because it's just a warning message. But that message is an indication that you might have missed something in the cleanup phase. And that's the bonus mistake that is actually tricky to spot. Not doing a proper cleanup phase during shutdown. But that one is a tricky one because the issue here could be twofold. So there could be some cleanup issues related to the test setup, or there could be some cleanup related to the application shutdown that is missing. So let's see what's happening here. So yes, there is a cleanup issue in our test because we started an in-memory Mongo instance and connected to it in the before all, but we didn't close our connection in an after all. That can be easily fixed by adding a client close and stopping our in-memory database server. In our test setup, we've actually used the override provider to override the Mongo client during our test. And you might think that surely this should be the job of our application to close the connection when the app shuts down. And you would be 100% right. And here is how you can do it. NestJS gives you the on-application shutdown interface and lifecycle hooks to do exactly that. So now you finally have an app that starts correctly and shuts down gracefully. We all make mistakes and that's perfectly normal, but as professionals, it's our job to learn from them, build systems and processes that help us catch them early and reduce their impact. And one of the best ways to do that is by writing tests, and you can watch this next video where I show you exactly how to test your NestJS application.